Anyone interacting with Inquiry by Design materials quickly realizes there's a recurring pattern within them. Essentially, it's a cycle of close reading work with tasks that deliberately scaffold students toward a more sophisticated understanding of the text with minimal outside information. Now, there are variations on this pattern, but it typically looks about like this. There's a first reading, where students encounter the text on its own terms, then a bit of comprehension work with small and whole group discussions, which then moves into interpretive work in small and whole groups, and that usually rounds the corner into some writing work about the text, and sometimes writing like the author. So, from the start, with the teacher, the students complete a first reading of the text, often with minimal introduction, marking moments that might seem confusing or interesting or important along the way, listing questions they might have. Now, there's typically no further prompt at this stage. We're allowing the student to encounter the text as it was written without pre-focusing their attention on what we might think is important. This is a part of our inquiry-based work. Students may then share and chart their questions and observations before they complete some basic comprehension work. In the comprehension stage, our questions are broad and open-ended, deliberately so. So rather than, say, 9 comprehension questions that walk students moment by moment through the text, we often ask them simply, what were the main events in this story and in what order did they happen? Or, who are the main characters and what do we know about them? We're not trying to tell students what's important, we're asking them and causing them to think about what's important. And they may not reach the same conclusions that we do. Now, in other texts, especially longer or more complex ones, we might ask students to chunk and retell the text, breaking it down into more manageable bites so that they can process it at a literal level. Like the other stages of this work, the comprehension work often loops through individual, small group, and then whole class discussion stages, and it requires at least a quick rereading of the text. The point of this work isn't to make sure that every student agrees on every single detail. Really, we just want them all to have a common, essential framework that they can build on. Students are doing a lot of repair work at this time in their understanding, and you hear that come up in their conversations. So we emphasize that you shouldn't ever skip this work with your students, even if you think that they're a group of strong readers already. As you watch your class, you may realize that you can pace the work a bit differently, but please don't skip the comprehension work. Following the comprehension work, our units move into deeper interpretive or analytic work with the texts. Our questions for these tasks are always text-based and open-ended. And as much as possible, we aim to open up topics about which readers can have genuinely different views. Again, we aim for authenticity. So we want these questions to be just as interesting and open-ended for a room full of adults as they are for the students themselves. Throughout this process, we emphasize that we're not looking for a single right answer. We're looking for thoughtful responses that make good use of the text to support their reasoning. And this can be difficult for us as teachers. We get an interpretation in our heads, or we have a favorite text, and all we want to do sometimes is to steer our students in that direction. But during this interpretive work, our goal is to push students to build on their ideas and those of their peers, to keep returning to the text and refining their thinking. Guessing what's on the teacher's mind is not the goal, even if that's what students have been used to doing in the past. The thoughtful work along the way is the whole point. We want our students to internalize the idea that reading is a thoughtful process. It's not an exercise where you can count on someone to tell you ahead of time what's important, or to tell you afterward what's right. Now, after the whole class discussions that mark the interpretive work, people typically feel there's a shift in focus to the writing work as the students begin to work these ideas into a more formal, structured response. But writing work has been going on the whole time. It starts with marking up the text and annotating it, building and checking ideas. Students are taking notes on their small and whole group discussions, adding lists and charts to their literacy notebooks. They're writing retellings and quick writes along the way. The whole time, too, the teacher has been charting student conversations, adding ideas to a display that anyone can check at any time. All of this work means that when it comes time to write, students have huge stores of resources to draw from, and the teacher's free to model specific skills or genre traits that students need. We have genre-specific writing guides that lay out the key traits of argument, informational, explanatory, and narrative writing, and we have dozens of genre-based targeted writing resources that dig into the finer points of the work for students at any level. Some of our units take an additional step, moving from write about to write like, where students get to try on the voice of the author they've been studying for a while. They get to play with the language in ways that may be new to them. In any case, as students complete the writing tasks and any other revision work, they move on and wrap up the cycle with an exercise in reflection and metacognition. Some units end with a retrospective task that requires students to draw from the texts and the ideas encountered throughout the length of the unit. Others end with a brief opportunity for a reflection and quick writes about what was learned and how. But we want to be clear about the importance of this. If students work through the comprehension and interpretive tasks and experience both the difficulty and the eventual spark of understanding, but they never stop to think about what they did and how they did it, we're missing an important opportunity. If we want students to build on and transfer these skills, we have to give them the space to name and label the moves they made, help them track them so that they can draw on them again the next time. This reflective work is, in some ways, the most important part of the cycle. This is how we help students carry over what they've learned into the rest of their world.